This is Tom Fox. I'm the voice of compliance, and welcome to the Ethics Movement, where we unpack today's big stories and how they relate to ethics and compliance. I'm one of your hosts, but I'm only one. So let me introduce my co-host, Philip Winterburn. Philip, welcome.
Good morning, Tom. Looking forward to the conversation.
In today's episode, it's going to be all about trust, but we're going to be unpacking trust through the lens of the coronavirus. How do companies trust their employees? Do they trust their employees enough to work from home? Do their employees trust their bosses that they have their best interests at heart? These and other questions in this episode of the Ethics Movement. We find trust really at the forefront of culture, the forefront of business ethics, at the forefront of many of the things that have led to corporate successes or indeed corporate failures. And it seems to me the coronavirus situation has brought to the fore this issue of trust. And I really would like to look at the business lens of trust. And how do you see trust as a part of the corporate culture and driving ethics to the center of business?
Thanks, Tom. I love that you brought up the reference to culture. I think that is absolutely central to where we see ethics and compliance programs moving at the moment in terms of going beyond the old compliance world of checking the box and actually seeing how do we influence and change and affect the culture of our organizations and protect the culture of our organizations. And as you said, trust is a core part of that. And institutional justice is something that we focus a lot on in terms of how does an ethics and compliance program actually drive that perception of institutional justice within the organization, because without that, you lose so much. I love there's a video out there of two capuchin monkeys, one being rewarded for handing rocks backwards and forwards with cucumbers, and he's quite happy until his friend in the next cage over is given a grape for handing his rock back. And suddenly the first capuchin monkey, who was quite happy with his cucumber, throws a fit. And so we've got this deeply rooted need to see equity in how we're being treated and how we're being influenced by the organization. And if we don't see that, then we lose trust. And that's when you start to see misbehavior. So I think we are in a very interesting time. The coronavirus, COVID-19 outbreak has created an increased focus on this. People are looking for information and are struggling to find where is that trusted source? Where do I get the information I need to make the decisions I need to make to protect myself, my family, my friends, my colleagues?
Philip, employee trust is, I think, one of the most important aspects of culture, but even the coronavirus has driven home issues around companies that are now moving to work from home policies. Even in 2020, that is still a relatively new thing and a relatively new workplace addition. And many employers are concerned that employees will not work as hard, work as thoroughly, work as diligently if they work at home. Conversely, employees who at this point might feel for their own personal safety and health that they should be allowed to work from home, recognizing they're committing to putting in a full 8-hour day of work at home. And if an employer does not give them that option, that can engender, if not some hard feelings or some real resentment going forward. So how do you begin to help a company think through trusting its employees and then allowing its employees to trust back up to management?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic. I mean, in the current environment, those organizations that have the flexibility to enable people to work from home, I don't think they have an option. I think they have to take that step. And so this is going to be a very sort of empowering moment for the organizations and the employees, because the organization is going to have to trust their employees. It's very clear, there's statistics out there that keeping people at work is going to increase contagion, increase infection, and as a result, increase deaths. And so companies that can support working from home when the time is right, should certainly do that. Whether they trust their employees or not is obviously a pretty damning statement if you're in a situation where you don't trust your employees to work at home. We ourselves are looking at this within our organization and recognize beyond that, just that basic trust, but also there are some employees who have young kids who may not be able to get to school. And so in this situation, they'll be going home to work from home, but in a noisy household with children that need support as well. So there's actually a realization that employees aren't going to be able to put in a full 8 hours out at 8-hour day. And companies are going to have to acknowledge that and support their employees in this moment. And I think this is actually going to go towards building that trust, because the employees will hear that and understand that. And then going forward, this will create an opportunity for organizations in the future beyond coronavirus in other risky situations or just as a general course of business to now have established that trust, because there's no better way to establish the trust than to give it in the first step.
Philip, let me pick up on that last point because I find that fascinating. It almost seemed to me that you were suggesting that if we consider this a crisis, and I'm going to call it a health crisis, if in this health crisis steps are taken that does begin to establish the relationship of trust, does the coronavirus health crisis create an opportunity to build a much more or a more robust and stronger culture, starting with trust, because it's not the situation where perhaps management wants to give trust, but it has to. And it has to for a variety of reasons, not only the personal health and safety of the employees, but if the entire sort of infrastructure of schools, other businesses, service industries has to take a step back, and the home has to be the center of many of these things now going forward. It seems to me there's a real opportunity to create something very valuable and useful going forward out of the coronavirus situation.
Yeah, I think there is a potential for that. When you look at many of the great advances that we've had over the centuries, a lot of them have come in moments of great adversity. And so this is one of those moments, and maybe this becomes a watershed moment that we'll look back on years from now and say this was the point at which working from home became mainstream. And people were forced to adjust to this. Companies were forced to trust their employees and discovered that this can actually work. And obviously the benefits of being able to support people, whether it's fully working from home or partially working from home, in terms of environmental impact, the standard of living, all of those challenges that people go through at the moment, this may open this up and actually make this a watershed moment for us. What I'm interested in as well is going beyond the coronavirus, and I'm wondering, Tom, your perspective on the financial crisis that is now dovetailing into this. So coronavirus itself has a challenge for us, but I think our reaction to the coronavirus is creating a secondary, potentially bigger and longer lasting challenge for the global economy. And I'm wondering your perspective on that.
So yes, that is obviously front of mind of many people, literally from the Tom Fox household to Washington to Moscow and beyond. Many other capitals, London, you name the capital. But Philip, I guess the two thoughts I have is the macro economic fallout from this is certainly one thing, but it struck me that there are things I can do, as in I can do personally. There are things that you can do as you can do personally. There are things every employee can do, not only in terms of the health, their own personal health and safety, but their own productivity. And we touched upon working from home, but it also may be that we can utilize tools that our corporations provide that are available to us online that we really haven't utilized before. For those listening to this podcast, we are recording this remotely. So can I do business remotely? If I do business remotely, am I presenting a professional manner, professional appearance to you if you are a client or a customer? Would that impact the way you might consider doing business with me going forward? Are there local service providers that you might utilize in a different way so that you might help them continue to do business going forward, even if it's simply to call in an order and go pick it up, as opposed to maybe going to dine in at a restaurant? Are there service providers that you might utilize during this situation that you haven't in the past? Remote service providers. Try remote tactics. Try new forms or at least different means, methods, and manners of communication so that you can continue to get your message out, even if you can't do an in-person event that you might typically have done going forward. So if I focus really on what can I do, what can I control, what can I do to try to keep I'm located in Houston, so obviously thinking about energy, but what can I do to help keep the energy companies and the energy business afloat with the much greater, as you point out, macro issues that the service economy could take a decidedly big hit. Italy, I was stunned to find that 70% of the country is based on the service economy. Certainly tourism is part of that. But if you've evolved past a manufacturing sort of blue collar economy into a service economy, that could well be susceptible to these sorts of disruptions going forward. So right now I've tried to focus on what can I do to continue my business, but to continue my business in a way that actually utilizes new tools, new strategies, new tactics to communicate my message in a way that perhaps I haven't utilized before because I depended on kind of the personal touch, the handshake, those sorts of things that we've done business with and through literally for years. So coming up after the break, your ethics and compliance takeaways on trust in the workplace.
In difficult times, we want to connect with our peers. We created the Converge community so you can connect with ethics and compliance professionals who are facing the same challenges you are. Sign up today and join the conversation in our discussion forums. Head to support.conversant.com to get started.
So the ethical takeaway for today, Philip, we have really focused on trust. And that's something that I would like every listener to this podcast to take away from this podcast. But let's break it down and give them some specific takeaways that they can utilize in not simply their ethics and compliance program, but in their greater corporate culture. We have both touched on the need for trust, but maybe you can expand on that from the E&C perspective.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. I think, obviously we see in a healthy culture within an organization, there is high trust. So the question is, how do we actually drive that? How do we create that? And we see a lot of questions around not just how do you create it, but also then how do you measure it to make sure that you are actually having an impact. And we can talk about that maybe in a minute. But what I see a lot of organizations doing is really looking to create that transparency. So when a reporter reports a concern, make sure that they're treated with respect, that their concerns are taken seriously, that they understand the process that you're going through, is one example. Don't let it disappear into a black hole. How do you create transparency in the organization? I've seen organizations start publishing monthly or quarterly ethics and compliance reports where they actually talk to some of the situations that have arisen. Some organizations are very scared of doing that, frankly. They don't like to expose sort of the dirty laundry. But I think there's real value for employees to hear that a senior executive was held accountable for their actions, that there was the justice that no matter your position in the company, you are treated with the same level of, I'll call it sanction, in terms of whatever behavior you were exhibiting. And so you have that equity across the organization. I think starting to create those things are some of the areas that I see companies creating that trust from top to bottom. I'm interested what you're seeing, Tom.
So, Philip, I would think it all begins with accountability. Are you accountable as a business leader? Are you accountable to your employees? It's not simply do you talk the talk. Obviously, it's do you walk the walk. But are you accountable in your actions? Are you accountable in the decisions you make regarding profits and losses? Particularly during this time, are you accountable for the health of your employees and the safety of your employees, even in the where a short-term loss might be seen as a byproduct of that? As an employee, am I accountable back to you? If you're my boss, I have to be accountable to you to deliver to you my best effort during this time. Once again, the economy may be on a downward swing, but as I am accountable to you as my business leader, I'm accountable to give you my best effort, not to show up at work at 8 o'clock, but to actually give you what you need so that you can lead this organization. So I would view it really through the lens of accountability. If I could take that sort of as a macro view, on a more micro view, I think you've absolutely hit it on the head in terms of institutional justice, institutional fairness. Is there fairness in the way people are treated? Is there consistency in the way justice is applied? Is it consistent for the business leader as it is for the employee? Are there consistent outcomes, not simply in discipline? And I don't want to really get caught on the rabbit hole that everyone's punished the same. It's consistency in promotion. It's consistency in those who receive discretionary bonuses. It's consistency in those who receive praise from an accountable leader to those within an organization. Of course, there has to be consistency and discipline, but I would like to maybe expand that sort of consistency as a part of overall institutional justice and institutional fairness.
Yeah, I think that's great. I love the use of the word accountability. I've seen, when you look at just going to the helpline world, how companies put helplines out there and ask their employees to report concerns, where more progressive companies I see putting real education behind the accountability that you have as an employee, that if you see something, you are accountable to speak up. So there's that accountability is two ways. The executive leadership, the managers are accountable for the culture they're creating, for the actions they're taking, as you said, that do what they do, not what they talk about. So make sure you're doing, not just talking. But there's a flip side of that, which is the accountability on the employees to speak up, to intercede, give people the moral authority to step in and take action.
Philip, one of the most interesting presentations I saw at a Converge event was a chief compliance officer who talked about an employee survey where the employee said, we want to speak up, but we want to speak up to our supervisors. We want to speak up to the people we directly report to, our middle management. And what the CCO recognized was middle management had not been trained on how to receive that information. And so they put in place a training program, a manager's toolkit to receive a speak up, to receive a reporter coming into their office. And that training alone increased not only the number of people who spoke up and reported, but the number of people who reported through the helpline actually dropped because you had the intimate person-to-person contact, and then the manager was turning that information over to the CCO. So there was still full accountability. There was still full reporting, but was in a way that the lower level employees felt most comfortable with, but the middle management employees felt comfortable receiving that information. And I think it led to greater trust and greater culture at that organization.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's actually a clear example of trust. It's the employee has more trust in their direct line manager than they do in this ethics and compliance nebulous group that they may never have met. And so feeling comfortable stepping forward and reporting a concern to your immediate supervisor or a manager above them is often more comfortable for the employee than it is for them to go to something anonymous that they don't know. And in fact, we heard yesterday at a roundtable event where an organization had really pushed out the message of the speak up culture and making themselves more available and more approachable. And the helpline usage went down, but people actually walking into the ethics and compliance offices and saying, I need to talk to you about this, because people felt comfortable to create that personal connection. And it goes back to, at the end of the day, we are humans, and we can never forget that in this industry, that people need that person-to-person connection, which is the foundation of trust.
Philip, I would like to leave our audience with really an ethical rallying cry. And I'd like to start with a quote from Ernest Hemingway, where he said, "The best way to find out if you can trust somebody is to trust them." And I really think the coronavirus situation has given us that opportunity to trust. It's given management the opportunity to trust its employees. It's given employees a chance to trust their management. Can we perhaps use that as a rallying cry going forward for companies to actually trust?
I think so. I think this is a pivotal moment for society. I think we're going to go through a lot of changes over the next weeks and months. And maybe there is some silver linings to these clouds that will come out of it with a stronger culture in organizations, a stronger culture of trust that we can build on in the future. So with that, I would like to mention to the audience that we have our Converge community, our online community. So I would encourage you all to join that, to be part of this conversation. We have additional advice out there. We have conversations with your peers happening, and you will also find new episodes of this podcast as we go forward. So please sign in, sign up, and join the conversation. Tom, thank you so much for this. I'm Philip Winterburn.
And I'm Tom Fox. Thanks so much for listening.